Hi there, my name's Tamara. I'm one of the nurses at the Diabetes and Pregnancy Clinic at the Jim Pattison building. I just wanted to talk to you today about gestational diabetes. You should have received a package from us already with a meter and a record book talking about diabetes and pregnancy. I'll refer to this again later, and a lot of what I'm going to talk about is in here already if you need more information. There's also going to be a dietitian doing another section on healthy eating for you and baby to ensure you're gaining enough weight and keeping the blood sugars at a good level. For starters, I want to talk about what gestational diabetes is, why it happens, how to control it, and why we want to control it. Gestational diabetes is a situation in pregnancy where your blood sugars are higher than where we want them to be. Every time that we eat, our foods turn into sugar in our blood. It's up to the pancreas to pump out insulin to control those blood sugar levels and take the sugar from the blood into the cells to give us energy. Because of the hormones coming from the placenta at this time in your pregnancy, the blood sugar level stays elevated because those hormones are fighting against the insulin. And then we have high blood sugar levels. This can happen for some women for a variety of reasons. Again, they're listed in your book. You might be having twins, you might be having triplets, sometimes being born in a certain country, your ethnic background, maybe you have a family history of diabetes, just being over the age of 35, having a higher than ideal body weight before you got pregnant. Some women don't have any risk factors at all, but this can still happen and it's still important for you to monitor your sugars. We want to work together with you to control your blood sugar levels to reduce the risk of complications. There are a few risks for baby. Sometimes the baby could have a low blood sugar after birth. Sometimes the baby could grow very large and make delivery difficult. We're also concerned about the baby developing type 2 diabetes later in life or having to deal with childhood obesity. There's also a concern for breathing concerns for the baby after birth as well. There's a couple concerns for mom. We don't want the mom to have high blood sugars after the pregnancy. So we'll help you and manage your blood sugars throughout the pregnancy. Please keep in touch with us. The contact number is in the front of your book. We will be able to manage these blood sugar levels with your help of monitoring the blood sugars, and we'll balance out the food, which the dietitian is going to talk about in the next video. We're going to make sure you're getting enough food so that you're gaining enough weight, but also keeping the blood sugars under good control. And if you are able to, can you please keep active? We're recommending about 30 minutes a day of activity. You can break it up a little bit after each meal. Please be careful with activity if you notice any contractions or bleeding, but if you're able to, keep active. Walking, swimming, yoga, stretching are all very helpful at controlling the blood sugars. Again, if we can't get you the good blood sugars that you deserve, we can add in insulin. It's very safe. You don't feel it, and one of the nurses will go over it with you. It's a naturally occurring hormone. We just have to give you a little bit extra through a needle at this time in the pregnancy.
Hi, my name's Maya. I'm one of the dietitians that works at the Diabetes and Pregnancy Clinic. For today's nutrition class, I'll be referencing the information that we sent to you in your Diabetes and Pregnancy Nutrition booklet. So if you can please grab that right now. For today's class, we'll be focusing on how various foods affect your blood sugar and how to figure out which food combinations and portions will work best for you. This will be individual for everyone, but these guidelines will be a starting point. And as you go along and you're checking your blood sugars, we will help you to find out which food combinations will help to keep your blood sugars in the healthy range. One thing that's really important for you to take away from today's class is knowing which foods increase blood sugar and which foods will help to stabilize blood sugar. So knowing this will help you troubleshoot if your blood sugars are going high. So right now, if you can skip to page 1 on how foods affect blood sugar, you'll see a large colorful table with different columns. One of these columns will be the carbohydrate section. Carbohydrates are the foods that are going to turn into sugar in your body. Even if these foods do not look like they have sugar in them or don't list it on the ingredients list, some of these foods are still going to be turning into sugar as a process of digestion and be glucose in your bloodstream. So, when you think about these foods, think about the ones that are made out of flour. We have our breads, crackers, roti, tortillas, we have pastas, we have rice, quinoa. All of these grains, even though they don't have sugar in them, will turn into sugar. Other foods that have naturally occurring sugar include your fruits, juice, and also milk and dairy products have natural sugar called lactose in them. So it's still okay for us to eat these foods. We want to include them at every single meal, but you can think of each meal as having a carbohydrate budget. So there's a certain amount of carbs that you want to stick to and not go over. This is very important. Sometimes we see people trying to cut back on their carbohydrates to control the blood sugar. We don't want to do that. We want to hit the carbohydrate target and combine other foods with them that are going to help to stabilize and slow down the digestion. Some of these foods that help to stabilize blood sugar include our protein foods. Another really key thing I want you to take away from today's class is including protein at every single meal. Breakfast, lunch, dinner all need to have a protein source. This will help to slow down how quickly the carbohydrates go into your bloodstream and give you a better blood sugar response 1 hour after the meal. So if you look to the middle of the column, follow along as you see the protein foods. We have both animal proteins and plant proteins that you can include. So if you're a vegetarian, that's fine. Just make sure you stick to the vegetarian proteins. Some of these options include beef, chicken, fish, eggs. Another really good option people often forget about is Greek yogurt and cottage cheese. Those are going to be really high protein products and going to have less sugar than regular yogurt. If you're making your own homemade yogurt, do note that this typically does not have as much protein in it and will be more carbohydrate dominant, unless you do, of course, strain it in a cloth first to let the water drip out and concentrate the protein. Other proteins that you can include are tofu, beans and lentils, cheese, nuts and seeds, and peanut butters. Any type of nut butter really are all going to be really great sources. Another really good vegetarian option are edamame beans. So try and have these at every single meal. You want to think of your carbohydrates and proteins to be in a relationship. So these are all going to be together always. We always want to make sure we're eating carbohydrates with protein together. So keep those two paired. And then we have our vegetable foods. So at least at lunch and dinner, you should include some vegetables at the meal. It's okay if you don't at breakfast, but non-starchy vegetables that you want to include could be anything from carrots to broccoli, cauliflower, leafy greens, tomatoes. There's a large variety. However, do keep in mind that potatoes, corn, green peas, and squashes are going to go more towards the carbohydrate section. So just keep that in mind. Other foods that don't increase blood sugar include fats and oils. So you can think of butter, margarine, olive oil. All these foods don't turn into sugar whatsoever, but are going to help keep you full at the meal. So we do want to make sure you're including some healthy fats at your meal to help you be satisfied. Fats will also help to stabilize the blood sugar. And then when it comes to beverages, really try and go for non-sugar sweetened beverages. We do not want to be drinking any types of juice or regular pop. Even if the juice says that there's no sugar added in it, it's still going to be a concentrated form of sugar and going to go into the bloodstream very quickly. So things like water, sparkling water, diet juice can be consumed in moderation if you're really feeling like something sweet to drink, but try and make water your main beverage. If you are drinking coffee, try and keep it to no more than 2 cups of caffeinated coffee per day. So those are going to be your beverage options. And if we're trying to cook and make the food taste good, there's a bunch of different sugar-free condiments that you can include, such as herbs and spices. You can also include mustard, things like lemon, garlic. Those are all going to be really good ways to flavor your foods without adding extra sugar. Ketchup would be one condiment to be careful of because it does have a lot of sugar in it. Other things that we want to avoid, so quick digesting carbohydrates such as chocolates, candies, desserts, regular pop and juice like I just mentioned we want to avoid, and any other sorts of fast acting sugars that you might find that are very sweet tasting. So if you're unsure, always try and call us or ask your dietitian if a certain food can be included safely to keep your blood sugar in the healthy range. Now we're going to talk about different carbohydrate portions and how to make sure we're sticking to an appropriate amount at our meals and snacks. So first thing you'll need to do is flip to page 2 and you'll see a big carbohydrate servings table. All the portions listed on this table are equal to 15 grams of carbohydrate. What that means is that each of these servings is going to turn into approximately 3 teaspoons of sugar in your bloodstream. So we want to make sure we're not having too much of these foods at once. So I like to think of each food in its 1 15-gram carb serving. So if you look in the grain section, you'll see different types of grains such as bread. So you'll see 1 slice of bread is going to be equal to 15 grams of carb, and it's going to change depending on the grain you're choosing. Now most other grains like pasta or quinoa or potato, about half a cup serving is going to be equal to 15 grams. Rice is one variable in that formula where 1/3 of a cup cooked is going to be 15 grams of carb. So just note that the carbohydrate amount does change based off of the carb you're choosing. And then for other foods, you can have roti. About a CD size roti is going to be equal to 15 grams of carbs. And then depending on other foods, so you'll see quinoa on there, oatmeal as well will be listed. So depending on your preference, just reference this table to see what a 15-gram serving is, and this will help you add up to the carb budget for each meal and snack. Now in the fruit section, it does change quite a bit. So most fruits about the size of your fist or a small to medium apple will be equal to 15 grams of carb, and that would be a snack size. So we want to make sure we're not eating more than 1 fruit at once, and we're spacing them throughout the day. You can typically aim for 2 to 3 fruits per day, and that will be an okay amount for your blood sugar. But remember, always check your blood sugar to double check. When it comes to bananas, this is a different fruit as well. So about half a large banana is going to be a 15-gram serving. So you're going to want to cut any large bananas in half or buy the small mini bananas to be a 15-gram portion. Another one would be grapes. So about 10 grapes will equal 15 grams or a snack size. And for the berries, they are also variable. So for blackberries, strawberries, and raspberries, you can get 2 cups for 15 grams of carb. But for blueberries, you're going to want to stick to 1 cup. So depending on the fruit you're feeling like that day or what you have at home, just look at the list to see what would be an appropriate fruit serving for that one part of the day, and you can also add another one at a different part of the day. And then the other group to look at here are the milk products, because they also have carbohydrate. You can think of yogurt to be a 3/4 of a cup serving. It's plain yogurt, try and get unflavored. And then for milk, it's about 1 cup would be a 15-gram serving. And try and aim to get at least 3 to 4 servings of these calcium-rich foods in per day. Now that we've gone over this list, we're going to go over the carb budgets per meal. So you'll see how you can add these different carb portions together to reach each carb budget. So now we're going to start a fun activity. So what I need you to do is go grab a pen and paper, and what I'll have you do is write down the times of the day that you typically eat your meals, and then what you typically eat at each meal. You could also include 2 different types of meals in case you're varying it from day to day. Once you've written down your daily food log with your meals and snacks and the times, come back and we'll discuss what a balanced day of eating would look like, and you can reference to see if you need to adjust anything to help your blood sugars and balance things out a little bit more. So if you can reference page 3 in your booklet to follow along, you'll see a sample meal plan. So you'll see breakfast, lunch, dinner, and then there's 3 snacks throughout the day. Depending on when you wake up and what your day looks like, you might not need all of the snacks. But if you take a look, you'll see a carb budget beside each meal and snack. So typically for breakfast, we're aiming to eat about 30 to 45 grams of carbohydrate. For each of the daytime snacks, we're aiming for 15 grams. So that would be one choice off of the table we just went over. And then for lunch and dinner, we are aiming for 45 grams of carbohydrate. So that would be 3 portions of 15 grams of carb from the table we just discussed. And then we are also having a bedtime snack, starting out to aim for 30 grams of carbohydrate. Now this is very important that you do include this bedtime snack and don't skip it, because this may reduce your need for insulin and give you a better fasting blood sugar in the morning. So make sure that you're eating dinner early enough so that you have time to eat your bedtime snack. We also don't want to be eating a large meal before bed, so having a smaller little snack will be beneficial for your blood sugar. So, depending on what time you start your day, ideally you want to eat breakfast soon after waking up, and then we're going to be spacing each meal about 4 hours apart. So if you wrote down you're eating breakfast at 8 a.m., then you would want to try and aim to have lunch at around 12. If your schedule is slightly different and there's more than 4 hours between any meal, you want to include a healthy snack. So if you're having lunch at 1 o'clock, then it would be recommended to definitely eat that morning snack about 2 hours before lunch. Make sure you're spacing your snacks at least 2 hours away from the next meal. And then from there, from lunchtime, you would count another 4 hours, and most people do have a larger gap between lunch and dinner, so most of us are going to be including an afternoon snack of 15 grams of carb. You can also balance your snacks with a protein, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then you want to try and eat dinner by 7 p.m. latest if possible. This will give your food some time to digest and bring your blood sugar down before bedtime, in time for having a smaller snack before bed. Okay, so look at your current schedule. If any time of the day there's more than 4 hours between your meals, add a snack halfway between. If your meals are spaced 4 hours apart exactly, for example between breakfast and lunch, you're not required to have that snack unless you are in fact hungry, then that's fine. And then let's look at your timing from bedtime snack to overnight and to morning. Once you eat your bedtime snack, we don't want to be eating any more foods overnight. If you are getting hungry in the middle of the night, you might want to try adding more protein to your bedtime snack so that you don't get hungry. So we want to make sure there's at least an 8 to 10 hour window of no eating, no drinking, nothing but water. And 10 hours would be the maximum amount of time that you'd want to go, so try not to sleep in too long. Make sure you wake up by that 10-hour mark, check your blood sugar, start the day. And we want a minimum of an 8-hour fasting window. So the sweet spot is about an 8 to 10 hour gap overnight between your bedtime snack and your breakfast. So now we'll go over some examples of what a 45-gram carbohydrate meal will look like on your plate. So to do that, I want you to look over to page 5 in your book that has a big colorful plate on it, and you'll see 3 sections. So to get a really good blood sugar response after the meal, we want to try and keep our carbohydrate section to about 1/4 of the plate. You can also think of it as the size of your fist. So roughly a 1 cup portion of rice or potato would be a good amount. And then you're always combining that protein section, remember? And for that quantity or portion, you can use the palm of your hand as a guide. So for me, I would use my palm, which would be about 3 to 4 ounces of protein. If you're using beans or legumes, you're looking at about 3/4 of a cup. Okay? Also want to keep in mind that beans and legumes are a protein, but they have some carbohydrate in them, so they will increase blood sugar. That's why it's important not to go over that portion. And then the rest of your plate, at least at lunch and dinner, will include some vegetables. Okay? And if we're doing about 1 cup of carb on our plate, or 1 cup of, say, potato or noodles, that's going to be 30 grams of carbohydrate. Since our carb budget is 45, we have room to add 1 more carb choice to the meal. So you could always add 1 fruit or a glass of milk to the meal. One or the other will typically work. If you're adding both, then you're likely going to go over 45 grams of carb. So if you feel like having the milk at that time, you could save the fruit for later for your snack. Okay, so keeping in mind those portions, Some other things to note are if you're having bread, it would be typically 2 slices of bread that would go in this section, or 2 CD-sized rotis. Both of those are going to be 15 grams of carb each, so 2 would be 30 grams of carb, and then you'd have the same option to add the fruit or the milk to get to 45 grams of carbohydrate. Okay, so now I put together a meal for us to go over what a balanced plate should look like in real life. We have about 1 cup of rice here, and that could be the same for any other type of grain, so you're aiming for about 1 cup. And then here I'm having chicken for protein. You can replace that with a plant protein of your choice. And then we have our half a plate of vegetables here. So this size can change here in the protein section depending on the size of the palm of your hand. Or if you are a little bit more hungry at the meal, but you've already had your 1 cup portion of grain, you can always go back for a little bit more vegetables or a little bit more protein, as these foods do not have as much an effect on your blood sugars. So depending on your appetite for that day, these portions may change a little bit. And then if you're still hungry, to get to that 45 grams of carbohydrate for most grains, you can add a sugar-free yogurt, a milk, or a fruit to the meal to get to 45 grams after you've eaten your 1 cup of carbohydrate. Now I did put rice here for a reason, because 1 cup of rice is going to be equal to 45 grams of carb already. All of the other grains, 1 cup is 30 grams, but if you've done a full cup of rice at your meal, then it's not recommended to add the milk or the fruit afterwards. So depending on the grain that you're choosing, just tweak it a little bit and add up your 45 grams of carbohydrate. So I encourage you to look now onto your diet history, what you just wrote down, to see, are you sticking to 1 cup of carb at your meal? Are you having more than that? Have you included protein with every meal? If not, try and think of one that you can add. And are there at least vegetables at lunch and dinner? Now, it can be difficult to include some of these foods sometimes, especially if you haven't had time to go grocery shopping. So I would encourage you to always have stuff in your freezer that will last a long period of time. You don't always have to buy fresh. You can buy frozen vegetables that are easy to cook and steam, or even make a curry out of them. And then also for your proteins, you can buy things frozen, stock up a little bit, or you can buy your foods canned. Feel free to buy canned beans, just rinse them well when you're using them. And also for vegetables, those can also be bought canned, just rinse them well. And most of your grains will be easy to keep in the cupboard, just making sure you're going for those high fiber ones. And we'll talk about the better grains to choose most of the time in a minute. Just to go over a couple more examples of what your meal could look like. In that quarter of your plate here, if you're eating roti, it would be 2 CD-sized rotis that would fit in there. And then your 3/4 of a cup of beans if you're having dal, and then any cooked vegetables that you're having. I know oftentimes in South Asian cultures, sometimes it's just roti and dal or roti and sabji, but you do want to make sure you're including both protein and vegetables at every single meal. So finding a way to do that. An easy fix if you're not having dal or the protein there is making sure that you're at least having Greek yogurt at the meal, and that will ensure that you're getting your protein at that meal. And then if you're having bread, it would be similar. So 2 slices of bread if you're making a sandwich with some protein inside, and a side salad to make sure you're getting your half plate of vegetables, and then adding the fruit or the milk to get to 45 grams of carbohydrate. If you look back on page 3 with the example meal plan, there's going to be more sample meals and snacks for you to look at. And also if you flip over to page 4, there is a long list of daytime snack ideas and bedtime snack ideas that are going to be 15 grams of carb for the daytime snacks, with the option of adding a protein if you're more hungry. And then for the bedtime snack, it's typically going to be a starch as your carb choice. We want to make sure we're not eating any fruit at bedtime and no fruit at breakfast. Putting a little bit of berries in your oatmeal or cereal might be okay, but we really want to keep the fruit away at those times. So we're sticking to our grains as our carb choice, and then combining that with a protein. And it is a good idea to include a glass of milk at bedtime to help you reach that 30-gram carb serving at your bedtime snack. So to pull together everything we've discussed so far in class today, you can flip to page 6 well, you'll see a summary checklist of all the things we want to make sure we're doing each day. So some of these things include eating at least 3 meals a day and a bedtime snack, and most of you will require an afternoon snack as well, and making sure each of your meals are spaced no more than 4 to 6 hours apart. And if your meals are more than 4 hours apart, trying to include a healthy balanced snack that you can find options for in your booklet as well. And aiming to eat dinner by 7 p.m. and if possible, going for a walk after each of our meals, even if it's just a short 10-minute walk in the house, in the backyard, wherever you can. It will make a big difference in your blood sugar when you check 1 hour after the meal. Other thing to keep in mind is fasting overnight between 8 to 10 hours, making sure that we're eating a bedtime snack at least half an hour to an hour before bed, and then taking your supplements or medications as recommended by your doctor or dietitian. For example, any prenatal vitamins, iron if it was recommended, vitamin D is recommended for all Canadians to be taking, so that would also be another good one to take. And also any other supplements recommended by your doctor. Making sure you're staying adequately hydrated, drinking plenty of sugar-free fluids will also help to regulate your appetite and help keep your blood sugars in control, making sure that you're having adequate hydration, especially if your blood sugars are high. So be sure to check all these off and make sure you're doing them every day. Next, we're going to talk about which carbohydrates are going to be best for you to include most of the time. So if you can flip to page 7, there's going to be a substitution foods table. And this table is going to tell you which carbohydrates are going to be better to choose as much as possible. For example, the top row, you'll see bread products. Poor choices would include 60 or 100% whole wheat flour breads. And on the contrary, having a bread like sprouted grain bread, whole grain bread, rye, or pumpernickel would all be better options. And if you're eating roti, using a mixed flour to make it or mixing in some chickpea or chana flour would be helpful, as those are very high fiber grains. Whenever you can, you want to try and go for a high fiber product instead of a lower fiber product or a white product. The exception comes when we're looking at rices, which is the next section. The best rice for blood sugar are going to be things like parboiled or converted rice or basmati rice. Those are still good white rice options, but also getting in some brown rice or wild rice would be beneficial for the fiber. So just make sure you're referencing this list to see which higher fiber options that you can include if you're having some refined carb options right now. Other things on here listed are going to be sweeteners to use, as well as which jams and yogurts we recommend, and also for potatoes, as well as snack foods. So be sure to reference this page 7 and give it a good look over to see if you can change any of the carbohydrates that you're currently using that might be spiking your blood sugar to one of the recommendations listed on this list, which is going to have a better blood sugar response after the meal. Next, we're going to discuss label reading. So if you flip over to page 8, you'll see a nice big label on the back, and we're specifically going to go over a bread label. Also, if you want to grab your bread label to follow along and see how it compares, that would be a great option as well. So if you've grabbed your bread label, just make sure you flip to the back of the bread label and you'll see the nutrition facts table. So first thing you'll want to look at if you're following along on page 8 is the serving size. So here you'll see we're talking about 1 slice of bread. That's important because the serving size can change depending on the bread you picked up or the product that you picked up. For example, if it was crackers, it's going to be a different amount of crackers for each box. And then if you go halfway down the list, you'll see total carbohydrate. Now, if you think back to the beginning of class, we talked about 1 slice of bread being 15 grams of carb. This is what we're aiming for. We don't want our bread to be more than 15 grams of carbohydrate per slice. So here it says 19 grams. We would think that's too much. But there's one more thing that you need to take into consideration, and that's the fiber. And you'll see the fiber listed right under the carbohydrate. So here on our booklet, we have 4 grams of fiber. Since fiber is a carbohydrate that does not digest or turn into sugar, we always need to subtract the fiber. So 19 minus 4 means there are 15 grams of available carbohydrate coming from this bread. And this is great. If it's 15 grams of total carbs, net carbs we call it, after subtracting the fiber, 15 or less is okay. If it's more than 15, you're going to want to try a different bread, because as we're eating throughout the day, those carbs are going to add up. So here, if I look at the label that I grabbed, one of my slices has 17 grams of carb and 5 grams of fiber. 17 minus 5 would be 12. That's fine as well, as long as it's not over 15. And if you can find a slice of bread that has at least 3 or 4 grams of fiber per slice, that would be a high fiber bread if it has at least 4 grams of fiber. So another thing to watch out for, and trying to get one with a higher amount of fiber will be beneficial for your blood sugar as well. And you can follow this formula for literally anything that has fiber in it. If you've picked up a cracker box, you look at the serving size, take the carbs minus the fiber, and that will tell you how many carbs you're getting from those crackers, which will help you determine a 15 gram carb serving if you're using crackers as your carb choice as a snack. So you've made it to the last page of the booklet. We're now going to be on page 9, and it's going to talk about why is my blood sugar high. So it's great that we have all this information now, and like Tamara mentioned earlier, we're going to be checking your blood sugar and trying to track how the different foods affect your blood sugar and writing this down in your logbook. So if you do have a number that's higher than the recommended amount before or after your meals, you're going to want to try and see why that was high, and if you can fix that issue yourself on the next meal or snack. So if you could think about things that increase your blood sugar after the meal, now that you've checked maybe 1 hour after eating, if your blood sugar is higher than 7.7, what are some things that might have caused that? The first thing you'll want to consider is, did you eat too many carbohydrates, those foods that turn into sugar? So maybe trying a different portion next time and making sure you're not going over that 45 grams at the meal. Maybe the amount that you ate was right. So the other thing you'd want to keep in mind is, what about the type of carb you ate? Did you eat any juice at the meal? Did you have a refined carb like white bread or white rice? So trying a different type of grain might fix the issue and give you a slower rise in your blood sugar. Maybe the carbs were fine. Maybe you chose one of the suggested carbohydrates from our list and you had the right amount, but perhaps the protein was missing. Did you miss protein at the meal? You could next time try having the same meal with a little bit of protein, or maybe you need to increase the size of protein you had at the meal. Maybe it was not enough. Again, aiming for that palm size is what you're going for. The other thing could be, did you read the food label correctly? Maybe you had some crackers at a snack and you thought you were eating 15 grams of carb, but instead you actually ate more than that. So double check your labels. The other thing, maybe your meals were well balanced, you're sticking to the carb budget and you balance your plate like we've shown you to, but perhaps you just need a little bit of activity after the meal so you can continue to have the same meals, but adding that little walk afterwards might just do enough to bring your blood sugar down to where it needs to be. So those are some things to consider if your blood sugar is high after the meal. If your blood sugar is high before the meal, you're going to want to think back to what you just ate at your last snack or your last meal. For example, if I'm checking before dinner and my blood sugar is consistently higher than 5.2, I'm going to want to try different afternoon snacks. Maybe I've been having fruit at that snack, or maybe I've having 2 fruits, so maybe the amount of carb was off. The other thing that you could try is having a little bit less carb at that time. Maybe your blood sugar is a little bit more sensitive to carbohydrates, so maybe we'll try half a fruit and adding a little bit more protein to that time of the day. The other thing that you want to make sure of is that your timing was right. So making sure your snack was at least 2 hours before the meal. If it was closer, then your blood sugar is going to be higher as a result. Another thing that you can think about is in the morning, if you're checking when you first wake up, is trying different bedtime snack combinations, and making sure there is protein at your snack will be helpful for most people. So if you've just been having peanut butter and toast, maybe try crackers and cheese, maybe try Greek yogurt with some bread. There's so many options you can troubleshoot with. And then the other thing you'll want to consider is, did you have a high fat meal? So maybe you were out and you had something that was deep fried, and maybe you had this meal at lunch. Your blood sugars can look pretty good about an hour after you ate that meal, or even in the afternoon or before dinner, because a really high fat meal will take a much longer time to digest, so that food won't actually show up into your bloodstream until a few hours later, and maybe you see it at bedtime, even though you ate that meal many hours before. So if you had a meal that was different that day, maybe it was higher in fat, just to make a note of it in your booklet so that you know what's causing that high blood sugar, and when we talk to you over the phone or in clinic, that we have a reasoning for that high blood sugar. So always making sure if something different was happening, just make a note of it in your booklet. And something that doesn't relate to food but can also cause a high blood sugar includes washing your hands. So if you're seeing a number that's strange, maybe just wash your hands again, make sure they're dry, check your blood sugar to double check that is in fact what the blood sugar is at this time. The other thing to consider is if you're feeling sick or if you're very stressed out. So any type of stressor on the body, including illness or emotional stress, will make higher blood sugars. So if something like that is going on, just make a note of it in your logbook that you're having an illness on those days and that everything's being tracked accordingly.
I just want to review with you now when to check your blood sugars and what the goal targets are. If you can refer to this book and ensure that you've watched the video on how to use your meter. The link is attached to this video. I want you to start checking your blood sugar as soon as you can, so when we phone you, we have a great number of results to review. And I want you to check your blood sugar 6 times a day, and these are all listed for you on page 6 in your book. The first test of the day is when you first wake up. I'd like you to check within the first 15 minutes of being awake. All the rest of the tests are food related. So the next test would be 1 hour after you eat breakfast, just a couple minutes before you eat lunch, 1 hour after lunch, just a couple minutes before you eat dinner, and then 1 hour after dinner. If you could start recording these results on page 13 and 14 in your record book, on page 14. Page 13 is here for you to keep notes. You can keep track of your meals, the time of your meals, the types of foods that you've had, the portions, and then down below will be your blood sugar readings for each day. When you wake up, 1 hour after breakfast, just before lunch, 1 hour after lunch, just before dinner, and 1 hour after dinner. For now, we're hoping that your wake-up number, before lunch number, before dinner number are less than 5.3. If this number is elevated and you know why, can you keep some notes up in the top section? And then for your 1 hour after meal results, we'd like them to be less than 7.8. Same thing. If they're elevated and maybe you know that you're having a large portion or a large carbohydrate meal, can you keep track of some of the notes on the top page? And again, if you have any questions, please call us, and we have booked you for an appointment and we'll be calling you to go over these numbers in more detail.